Hello creatures, welcome to Bound by Words. My name is Madii. I'm a freelance editor and writer, and today we are talking about how, as writers, we can get inspiration from our TBRs. Now, most writers like reading. I don't know a single writer that I am personal friends with who isn't also an avid reader, but sometimes pulling inspiration from our favorite books and our TBRs and stuff can be, one, a little intimidating, and two, a little bit too similar. So if we read relationships and characters that we love, we don't want to copy them to the point where we're not putting anything original of our own work into the story. We want to make sure that if we're using things for inspiration, we're using them the right way, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But before I begin, more than 50% of the people who watch my channel are not subscribed. So if you find yourself here more than once and you're enjoying yourself, please consider subscribing and joining our Bound by Words community. Alright, without further ado, we're going to start talking about how to get inspiration from your TBR or your reading list. You're about to read it, I just finished reading it, I love this, I see this on Instagram, whatever it is, this is how we're going to get inspiration from it the right way. So I have some books here that I haven't read yet that I wanted to use, but a lot of these tips and tricks work for books that we have read as well. I know I personally am a sucker for good relationships, so if I read a book where I am really pining for two characters to get together, that's sort of that relationship that I want to mimic in my own writing, but you never want to just copy another author's work. And there's a few reasons why, and the biggest one is you want to make sure that the things you put out are original and creative in your own aspect. Not only will your readers appreciate the differences more and have new and fun characters to enjoy and live through, I just think it is best practices as a writer to have your own original work and your own original ideas. But I'm still a sucker for some of those relationships, and I still want to write relationships that are in my stories that readers pick up and feel the same way about. And the first way that you can go about doing this when you're looking at your TBR is by looking at the books themselves. So the first book I have on my stack is Caraval, which I don't know why I haven't read this yet. It's been on my TBR for so long. I recently picked up all 3 books in the series, so now that I have them in person, I think I am more likely to read them. But the first step in getting inspiration can just be the cover. The font, the whimsical, like how it has this open cover, it has like a ticket on the back, the sort of, I want to say aura that it gives, but I don't know if that's necessarily like a book appropriate term, but you can tell just how dramatic and whimsical this book is going to be by the printing and stuff on the cover. So whenever you're getting inspiration from your book, you want to look at things like that. You want to look at things like, this is the break decoration. And that's just really unique. It sort of has an old, like, caravan wallpaper kind of appearance to it. Let's be real, the saying, don't judge a book by a cover exists because people primarily judge books by the cover. But we're going to take this one step further. We're not just going to look at the cover, we're going to read the blurb. So whenever you read a book blurb for somebody who wants to get inspiration from a book, whether this is a book you haven't read yet and it's on your TBR, or if it's a book that you read this whole series, you love it, still go back and do this. Read the blurb. Read the blurb and find things that pop out and stand out to you. So the blurb for this book starts with, Scarlett has never left the tiny island where her and her sister Tella live with their powerful and cruel father. Now Scarlett's father has arranged a marriage for her, and Scarlett thinks her dreams of seeing Caraval, the faraway once-a-year performance where the audience participates in the show, are over. But this year, Scarlett's long-dreamt-of invitation finally arrives. With the help of a mysterious sailor, Tella whisks Scarlett away to the show. Only as soon as they arrive, Tella is kidnapped by Caraval's mastermind organizer, Legend. So things like that we're going to read and we're going to see what is highlighted. So her arranged marriage is really highlighted at the beginning, and that's the first impression I get from the book is she is in this arranged marriage that she doesn't want to happen. Now, for inspiration, you can take similar things like that, just the highlighted parts, and fill in all the details yourself. Maybe your character gets kidnapped, maybe they have this hobby or this thing they really want to do that they haven't been able to, or you can do the opposite. So her cruel father has arranged this marriage that she wants nothing to do with. Maybe in your book, this is a series you love, maybe in your book or your story or just your writing practices, you can try to write an opposite situation. Maybe your character is in an arranged marriage with somebody she absolutely adores, or maybe her doting father just encourages her to marry whoever she adores, and she gets kidnapped by Legend in the Caraval, and that sort of takes a similar setup and it spins in a totally different direction, and it gives you the opportunity to have different characters with different strengths as well as a whole different setting and setup without seeming like you copied somebody else's work. So this is actually one of the most recommended books on my TBR. A lot of people say it's incredibly original and suspenseful. Even the woman in the shop that I picked it up from was like, what do you mean you've never read this? You've read all these books, you need to read Caraval. So if you haven't read it, let me know what your opinions are of it down in the comments below. So our first step is judge the cover, look at the cover, read the blurb. So the next book and the next way to get inspiration from your favorite stories, we're going to be using A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which is another really highly recommended book I haven't read yet, which is why I picked it up. But this book is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and retellings are really common. So I think in the writing world, it is a common phrase that nothing is new, that you can tell the same story over and over again, but it's in how you tell it that makes it interesting. So that's advice and stuff that I hear and I see often. So when you're facing things like imposter syndrome, you don't necessarily have to worry about are your ideas original. You have to worry about is the way you're conveying those ideas original, basically. So A Curse So Dark and Lonely is the perfect book to use whenever we're talking about flipping a story and making old ideas more interesting. Flurry is a part of the video now. So the cover says an intense original retelling of Beauty and the Beast. So intense and original are the two keywords in there. This retelling of Beauty and the Beast is extremely different. So in the same way that we looked at the cover for the other one, we're going to look at the cover for this one. It has trees everywhere. It's very pretty. I do like the writing. I usually pop my dust jackets off, and the spine on this is still very pretty. And I sort of like that dark with like a silver sheen kind of appearance. So I get the impression from this that this is going to be like a dark, twisted version of the story. So instead of being a beast that needs to fall in love to break the curse, if you read the blurb, I found out that Prince Ren is actually reliving the autumn of his 18th year. So that's the big change. The common trope of I am a beast and I need someone to fall in love with me is switched into I'm stuck in a time loop. And then it seems like he turns into a beast later, which I'm not 100% sure if this is true. If it is or not, please let me know in the comments. But that's the impression I get. He's reliving this time in his life. And then it goes through like the girl's history and says nothing's ever gone easy for her. She actually stumbles into this strange magical world from Washington, D.C. So this is an urban fantasy, like a soft magic system instead of Beauty and the Beast, which is totally fantasy, is in a world that doesn't exist. So those changes can reform an old idea. So take a story you love, say Beauty and the Beast, or even this, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, and see what aspects of it you love. So the female protagonist that we're following for this book, or at least part of this book, her name is Harper, and she has cerebral palsy. So I think this is one of the reasons this book got a lot of its original recognition, but I have heard so many good things about the writing of this book. So think about your stories and think about ways that you can change the characters and ways that you can make it really impactful. If taking your favorite story and taking it out of the setting that it's in and putting it in a whole new setting, like a fantasy world hidden in Washington, D.C., if that can change the story entirely, then maybe flirt with the idea of writing your story like that. If your favorite novel has like an enemies to lovers relationship that you absolutely adore, then what caused that relationship? What happens if you change that relationship? What happens if instead of enemies to lovers, it's actually lovers to enemies? Look at things like that in ways that you can take the elements of the stories you like, whether it's on your TBR and you're just glancing over it like I'm doing here, or if it's in your favorite story. Is the protagonist rich and lives in a castle? What happens if they lived in an alley? Is your protagonist female? What happens if they would be male? Is your protagonist most skilled at something that helps them achieve their goal? What happens if they suck at that thing? Look at ways that you can just take the parts of the story that already exist and flip them entirely into something new. So I have one last book that I'm using in this video, but I actually have two more tips, so bear with me. This, I think it's really pretty and I could not show it. This is my edition of Incendiary. I haven't read it yet. I've had it for a few months. Red and black are my favorite colors, if you couldn't tell. So whenever I got this in my Fairy Loot subscription box, I was squealing. It's just so pretty. This was actually my first box too, so it was a great start to that relationship. But we're gonna do the same thing. So the red and the black theme. I love the glossy pages. The glossy part highlights the title, the crown, and this gem, if you can see it in my light. So those are the parts this book is drawing attention to, and that makes me feel like it's going to be a setting that has royals in it, honestly, is the impression I get. So then we open it up and we read the blurb, and it says, Renetta was an only child when she was kidnapped by the crown. As a memory thief, the rarest and most feared of the magical Moria, she was used to carry out the king's wrath, a siege that resulted in the deaths of thousands of her own people. So we have somebody who is kidnapped by the crown. If we were to flip the story as in our last tip, maybe we have somebody who is royal that was kidnapped by nomads. But then we see a lot of tropes of, I want to say, guilt and anger. So throughout the blurb, it says that now she's working against the crown. So the king forced her to do something that resulted in the deaths of thousands of her people, and outraged, she is now working against the crown. What if instead what she did ended up killing royals? So we're going to keep reading. It says, now Renetta is one of the Whispers, a rebel spy group working against the crown, when Des, her commander, and the boy she's grown to love, is taken captive by the notorious Dorado. Renetta must return to the palace and complete his top-secret mission herself. Can she keep her cover even as she burns for vengeance against the brutal, enigmatic prince? So we have lots of tropes in here, and there are a lot of things that are highlighted. So she was kidnapped by the crown. She did something awful that killed a bunch of people. She's working for the resistance, and the person that she's been working with, that she has grown to love, has been kidnapped. Those are the highlights. This is a big book. There are probably, most certainly, if this is as interesting of a book as everyone says it is, there are dozens of things that are important that happen in this book that are not in those highlights. So whenever we're taking inspiration from books that we loved, let's take note of the things that aren't highlighted. So read the book, think about the things you love, whether it's the relationship, whether it's the mission, whether it's the tropes of guilt and vengeance, and then go back and read the blurb again. What parts did you love that weren't in the blurb? So those are the parts of this story is really focusing on that the author thought were the most important, that she put most of the emphasis on. What parts of the story would you think would benefit from emphasis? This story seems like it's weighted on the mission and the rebels and whatever she's trying to get done, but what happens if you were to switch that and the mission is actually now to save the person she loves? And he's so upset that I wasn't letting him in the video. But what if the highlight is on trying to get her love back? What if she didn't actually love him and she was using him and now he is captured and she has to do everything herself, but she can't? She really just needed him and he's not there anymore. So try to find ways to pull out parts that aren't highlighted or take tropes that you can find, like we said in our last tip, and flip them. So our fourth and last tip when taking inspiration on your reading list was actually inspired by Flash Fiction Fridays, which is something we do on Instagram every Friday, where the woman who runs it posts a picture prompt and everybody who participates actually writes a short piece on that prompt. So that just got me really interested in writing off of a picture. So this is the character art for the last character in Incendiary. And this actually came with the book. I really like that. I really like getting these. But character art is really common. Sometimes the character art is commissioned by the author, and you know that it is 100% approved. Sometimes the character art is purely fan-made. Sometimes it's canon, and sometimes it's not, and that is totally fine wherever you're finding it. I would just recommend taking your favorite book in your favorite genre and perusing through the character art. What are fans doing? What are fans seeing? What are they highlighting? So let's look at a series that has a huge following, like The Cruel Prince. So without any spoilers, our main love relationship in that book is very rocky, or in that series, I should say. There are 3 books. There are parts when you're like, I totally ship this, they're great together, and there are parts when you're like, I don't even know why they're even in the same room. And it goes up and down and back and forth, but if you see the character art, most of it are very romantic depictions of these 2 characters. Most of it are them being fun or playful or relaxed. Those are the things that the readers see that they really like, even though this relationship is so rocky and very dynamic. So take notes of how the fan art compares to the book. Take notes of the parts that the readers like and enjoy, because as writers, even though we write for our own pleasure, we write for the purpose of entertaining readers. So if that type of relationship is the most entertaining relationship in your genre of writing, and it's all over the internet and everyone's shipping this couple even though they have such a rocky relationship, then maybe you can take inspiration from that and write your characters having a rough relationship. Maybe one of them always says the wrong thing. Maybe one of them's just really passive aggressive all the time, and it adds suspense and drama and difficulty to the relationship. Some people feel really strongly for or against writing to the market. Some people see a trend and they're like, oh, this is what I need to write. Some people see a trend and they say, well, I really want to avoid that because I want my writing to be fresh and new and special. And I think that either way, this could benefit you. If you see a relationship you really like that people are enjoying, you can use the idea of, okay, they like the rocky relationship, but not necessarily use the same dynamic or not necessarily use a setting that makes them thrive. It is good to be aware of the market, whether you want to write to it or write against it. So if your goal is to write something totally original, then maybe whenever you're looking through these fan arts and you're looking through the things that people really enjoy about books that are on your TBR or books that you have just read, you can take note of the things they really love and make a list of them, and that can be your list of, I don't want to do these things, but I want to do something else just as well. And I do have one bonus tip to give whenever it comes to getting inspiration off of our TBRs or our reading lists. And for the reading list for books that you've read, I would read a book and then write down what the one big thing you remember is from the book. Now, usually you read a book and you have so many feelings and you're just really invested if it's a well-written book. So maybe wait a day or two and then go back and say, like, if I could pick one thing that was like the core of this story, what was it? Was it the romance? Was it the action? Was it the adventure? Was it the number of things that went wrong? What really stuck with you about the story? You might need to wait a week before you can pull out that one thing, but I would definitely go back and do it. And when it comes to TBR, I would talk to people online who have read it and ask them, what is one thing that stuck with you on that book? Maybe they'll say, it was the themes of opposition that I really liked, that I really resonated with. And I'm totally guessing because the front cover says an intense and vivid story of revolution. So that's something I feel like should be in this book. So maybe that's the one big thing that stuck with them and that was the most important thing. And then you read the book and you're like, oh, well, that's like 2 or 3 down my list. It sort of helps you see, well, what do you want to be the highlight in your book? So this book is marketed as a book of revolution, but maybe you're reading it and you're like, I value the magic system in this book as a reader more than I value the themes of revolution. So that can give you a little bit of inspiration of how you want your story to come across to readers. So do you want your magic system to be the overarching takeaway that all readers leave with no matter what happens in the book, or do you want them to take away with something else? And for any of you who have struggled with theme in your story, that is basically what theme is. It's what are those big takeaways that you feel are really important. So by writing down the one things that we remember about the books or asking people what their one thing they remember about a book is really just asking for, what theme do you think represents this book the most? So the next video I'm posting is actually on 4 ways to get over writer's block. So if that's something that interests you, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I post bonus content like this video. And also Bound by Words has its own business Instagram now. So if you haven't followed me yet, I'll put the handle above my head. You make sure you want to follow that because one, I post writing advice from an editor, little things about punctuation and characters. I also post a lot of my business information when I have openings, when I'm accepting manuscripts. If you did not already know, I've been accepting manuscripts for copy edits for a few months now. So if you need help polishing your book before publication, make sure you leave a comment down below, or better yet, DM me on Instagram. But in the meantime, I will see you guys on Monday.